Hi, everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 18th of March, 2025. And man, there's just like so much bad shit going down. I can't, it's one of those days where it's hard to kind of fathom it. I went for coffee this morning with a friend who, like many of us, I think is kind of in this place of feeling just completely overwhelmed by the onslaught of terrible news. And so I do want to remind you all that we have done two things here in the last couple of days. The first is that we're going to be running a webinar on Friday on how to build a community of change makers, even if you feel alone. We have a lot of people in this community who kind of feel like they don't know how to find their people, or are struggling to find their people, or are finding that their people who they thought were their people don't really want to be as engaged right now. So I've dropped the link for that into the chat here on the broadcast, and I'll make sure it's also in the comments below. The other thing that we've done, and if you go to the community section of YouTube, you're going to see this, is we created a guide on how to go from overwhelmed to impactful at this moment. And that's like a downloadable free ebook. So if you want to go get it, you can do that. And what it does is it'll walk you through how to really manage all of those emotions that you have right now, those things that are keeping you from taking action, maybe in the way that you want to, or maybe at this point, causing you to feel like you don't even know where to start. Right? Just make sure you get that guide, because that it walks you through 5 steps on how to really like dig yourself out of freeze response. And I highly encourage it. So that's in the community section, and I'll also make sure that that is dropped. I'll actually put a link up here for that also. I'll make sure that all that stuff is dropped into the comments after the broadcast. And the link to register for the webinar is already in the show notes. So we'll make sure you guys can get access to all that. All right. We're going to talk about what happened in court yesterday, because it's so chaotic and hard to believe. Like, I'm definitely having one of those moments as a lawyer where there were things about that hearing yesterday that left me speechless, but we're going to talk about it. All right, first things first. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a cream-colored sweater with some black piping on the sleeves and the collar. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I'm wearing a pair of thick gold hoop earrings today. Excuse me. And I am sitting in front of my bookcase and my yellow utility cart, and the big cushy chair is back there somewhere with a basket on it today. And I am coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan land. All right. So yesterday there was a hearing. This was an emergency hearing that we knew was coming on yesterday's broadcast in front of Judge Boasberg in the DC District Court, concerning the court's prior order on Saturday night that the planes that were in the air deporting people under Trump's declaration, under the Alien Enemies Act, had to be turned around and brought back to the United States, which was not done. There were 3 planes in the air at the time. All of them continued on to El Salvador and Honduras. None of them turned around, notwithstanding the judge's oral order at the time to turn those planes around. Yesterday, he held an emergency hearing at 5 o'clock to try to determine what exactly had happened. And it did not go well for the DOJ. It also didn't really go well for America, if I'm being honest about it, because the DOJ lawyers essentially refused to answer questions that the judge put to them about how many flights there were in total, who was on the plane, how many people were on the plane, who made the determination, all this sort of stuff about how these planes actually continued, when he literally had said in the courtroom, those planes must be turned around. And he was not happy. The tone that he was using with regard to the DOJ was very terse. And the other thing that he did was that he ordered them by noon today, so like now, to file declarations under oath answering a whole series of questions, many of which were the same questions that I just asked. Part of the reason for getting them to do that is that if they lie in those declarations, it's a perjury charge. And also, he wants to know whether or not he's going to hold people in contempt. He did not make a contempt ruling yesterday. And I have to say, there were lots of people in the comments when I was kind of live threading this over on Blue Sky who were like, why isn't he doing anything? Why isn't he leaving it to the side? Well, he told everybody it wasn't going to be a contempt hearing that day, because he has to have actual admissible evidence, which, by the way, is declarations. And so we're waiting to see what happens today. Part of the thing that was really horrifying about this hearing was the DOJ attorneys' flat out refusals to answer the judge's questions, claiming that it was like national security was implicated, or, there were terrorists on the plane. They also made this really specious argument that we talked about yesterday, where they claimed that because the planes were in international waters, the president had more authority over them than he did if they were inside the United States, which, by the way, is a load, let me say it again, of horse shit. I used to do international human rights cases. That's not how any of this works. The United States president does not magically get more powers when things are happening in international waters. Okay. I personally was really stunned. And, again, I have to remind everyone that one of the things about still being stunned by things means that, like, we maintain our humanity and our aim for institutions to hold. I was really stunned by the responses by the DOJ lawyers. Not surprised, but still stunned. Because I will just tell you that if I had tried to pull any of the stuff that they pulled yesterday in federal court in front of a judge, I would have expected to be disbarred. I would have expected to be, held in criminal contempt and sent to a cell, which still may happen. One of the things that I want to remind everybody of is that judges do have the inherent authority to enforce their orders. And that can include putting attorneys in the clink when they don't comply with orders. So we're going to have to see what Boasberg does, and what happens with these missing papers that were due 6 minutes ago. I and Katie Fang and others have been watching this docket very closely, and there was nothing filed as of 5 minutes to noon Eastern time. So again, this is going to raise some really serious questions. It is raising some really serious questions. I'm just going to add one other thing. It's very clear that there has been a determination, we talked about this yesterday, by Tom Homan and others, that they're just simply not going to comply if judges order them to do things that they don't like. And that in and of itself is contempt of court. So the question now is, what is Boasberg going to do about it? And he does have various mechanisms at his disposal. He can find them in contempt of court. He can order them to pay fines. He can send them to jail for up to 6 months per violation. And he can enforce it against attorneys. He can enforce it against parties. He can enforce it against government officials. And again, we're going to have to see how this plays out in the next day. I mean, all of this is very front and center. Now, we have to talk a little bit about these deportations themselves, because one of the things that has happened since yesterday is we've learned something about the people who were on these flights. Not all of the people who were on these flights, but a few of them. And I will just tell you, there are people who were put on these flights who were inside the United States legally. There were people who were put on these flights who, according to their family members, got a cool tattoo that they liked the look of that has now been mistaken for a gang tattoo. And they've been put on a flight to a concentration camp in El Salvador. Head shaved, stripped naked, put into matching clothing, forced into slave labor for at least a year. We know that there are people who were newly relocated who had sought asylum inside the United States, which is legal, who have now been deported on those planes. And this is on top of new stories that we're adding into this, into the whole science of how ICE is working right now, that have revealed, for instance, that a U.S. citizen was picked up in Chicago last week and held for 10 hours. His driver's license and his documentation was contained in his wallet. ICE took his wallet away from him. They didn't even look at his wallet for 10 hours. They detained him and interrogated him. And once they realized he was a U.S. citizen, they let him go without any documentation of the fact that they had detained him. So things, I said this yesterday, but the slippery slope is gone, right? We're there. If this is the means by which ICE and other agencies inside the federal government are now operating without any legal enforcement, we really are at a point where there's sort of like an empowered brown shirts agency inside the United States government. And that does not bode well. I personally am hoping that Judge Boasberg, who again is the chief judge of the district court for the District of Columbia, used to be the head of the FISA court, by the way. This is not a judge who, is messing around, doing this for the first time, unexperienced, hasn't dealt with highly classified material, which is yet another reason why what the DOJ lawyers did yesterday in that courtroom is so offensive. This is a judge who has had access to some of the most highly classified materials inside the United States government for years. So the idea that somehow national security would prevent them from answering his questions is really, really specious. So in any event, we are all waiting on Judge Boasberg now. And I said this yesterday, my hope is that he really drops a hammer, because a message needs to be sent now by the courts that these agencies and these individuals cannot act outside the bounds of the law. They can't defy judicial orders. They can't violate people's constitutional rights willy-nilly. They can't deport people without due process. Because when you deport people without due process, you end up with like, somebody who got a tattoo of a rose, who's like in the country legally, being sent to a concentration camp because some rando inside ICE decides it looks like a gang tattoo, or maybe even doesn't, but just sends him because he feels like it. That's where we are. And it's an incredibly dangerous moment, just an incredibly, incredibly dangerous moment. So we'll see. Okay. We had some questions on the Patreon feed this morning about what's coming next in terms of nonviolent protest. So I want to make something really clear here. Obviously, like I'm a big nonviolent civil disobedience person from the standpoint of I really do not believe in violence as a means to an end. We've talked about this here before, by the way, because the studies show that when violence is used to overthrow regimes, the subsequent regimes tend to be more violent and don't last. Nonviolent protest, on the other hand, tends to achieve democratic government much faster, and what comes next tends to last much longer. So nonviolence. I can't say it loudly enough. Nonviolence, please. Okay. One thing I do want to point out here, though, is as Social Security becomes more and more of a challenge, for lack of a better way of putting it, where we're seeing more and more threats to Social Security coming to the fore. We're hearing stories about people being declared dead who are not. We're hearing stories about people who, within our own Patreon community, we have somebody who's been diagnosed with Parkinson's, who's on Medicare, similar sort of situation. They have denied telehealth. Her doctor is 2 hours away, right? Where we're seeing real challenges to people's physical safety and survival as a result of the cuts that DOJ is engaged in. I personally think we're going to see quite a bit more protesting, people in the streets, the closer people get to precarious situations. And all of that should be nonviolent. And nonetheless, when you really threaten the ability of people to survive, action is the next step. Okay. So I don't know what that's going to look like. Anybody who tells you that they do doesn't know what they're talking about, because it really depends on how people organize and the messaging of the organizing. As we've talked about so many times here, like most effective protesting is protesting that has a very clear demand and very clear messaging for what it's after. Again, one reason why Tesla takedown has been so wildly successful. This morning, apparently Tesla opened with its lowest stock price ever. Thank you, Tesla takedown. It's having the positive impact that we want it to have. I just want everybody to remember that, as with everything else, when you engage in mutual aid, when you engage in organizing, community-based organizing where you live, and you build communities of trust, you're also building out for disruptive civil disobedience, meaning like, sit-down strikes. There was a die-in this week by people who are losing their Medicare and their Medicaid. Again, these are time-tested tactics. I've been thinking about ACT UP and my first work in relation to the AIDS crisis when I was a teenager. So many of those strategies continue to be very effective if they are tacked with effective messaging. So yes, we are going to see more protests. Does anybody know what those are going to look like right now? Probably not, but I can just tell you that I feel as though kind of a protest movement involving seniors whose Social Security and Medicare is at threat has the potential to be wildly successful. And so again, it's a good moment to remind you all, get engaged now, get involved with organizations where you live, mutual aid organizations, your local indivisible chapter, if they're well run, other organizations where you know and trust the leadership. Make sure that you know that the people who are organizing what you're doing have safety protocols and that they understand how to keep people safe, and they're getting really good legal advice. But it's time to really start to get engaged, if you are not already, in potentially organizing for what's coming next. All right. And yes, I agree, Julie. Schumer having to cancel his book tour is proof that public pressure works. Schumer had to cancel his book tour this week because the backlash against him after what happened last week has been so loud, and protests were planned. Very loud, very big protests were planned at every location where he was planning to have a book event. So again, reminder, good people are organizing in really interesting ways right now, and you need to tap into that, especially if it's something that is very near and dear to your heart. Okay. Somebody asked a question this morning about what to do about friends and neighbors who are staying silent. And so this is a really good question. And actually, it's something that I've had conversations with, one of our training groups yesterday. I had conversations this morning with a friend about it. I've had conversations with people that I know about it in the last couple, that I know personally, other organizers in the last couple of days. And here's the thing. There is still a huge segment of people, even those who are aligned with progressive values who are extremely burnt out from the outcome of the election, and also at this moment are really frozen. They're scared. They're overwhelmed. Just as we started out talking about in this morning's broadcast, they need a guidance on how to get engaged, because again, as with most of us, where we have been, this thing of like everything's overwhelming, there's so much that needs to be addressed. That's intentional. That's how fascism works, right? And they're not getting the guidance that they need. That's one reason, by the way, why we created this free guide that you guys can all go get. It's one of the reasons why we have to actually start talking to people about the importance of getting involved as a mental health strategy, right? Because when you're in community with people who really get it and who are working to make the world better, you will feel better. Okay. So one thing that I will just say here is that I think that some folks out there at the moment need to be invited to do things without pressure attached, right? Come to dinner, come out to coffee, come talk to me. I want to hear how you're doing, right? And that can lead to an opening if there is discussion there that's like, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid. I'm angry. It seems like everything is falling apart at once. I don't even know where to start. To then say, well, you know what? I'm going to an Indivisible meeting on Friday. And even if you're not sure whether or not you want to get involved, come with me, because you'll at least be around really great people and you'll get to hear really great people speak. And maybe that'll help you feel better, right? Or you can do something like, I'm going to my local food bank to do a volunteer shift, and just come with me. Come hang out, help me bag food. Let's give it out to people in our community who are hungry. That, this is a way to really make a difference right now. And people need us. Like, let's go try that, right? And it can be something where the messaging that you are providing is about the fact that it will help the other person feel better. It will give them a sense of accomplishment and being a part of something bigger. And I think we all need that in a way right now that reinforces that we're not alone, that it's not all hopeless, right? And even that it can be joyful. Like, let's not forget this. One of the great skills of organizing is to make it fun, okay? Like, I have a couple of examples that come to mind here, but like, I think about Black Voters Matter and all the work they did from 2016 through this election. Their community building is enjoyable. There's music and food and like community and dancing and all sorts of other things that like make voter mobilization joyful, right? Think about Souls to the Polls. That's another event that I like continuously remember, from the standpoint of how Black churches have organized. Also, we have plenty of people in the communities of the classes that I'm running right now who are doing similar things, who are working on, let's just say, like a community garden project, and are inviting people to come to like, I don't know, like a wine and cheese event on a Friday night to come hang out in the community garden green room, right? A greenhouse, and get to know people, right? And even though the community garden is there to do certain kinds of things, right? Help to feed neighbors, right? Help to get people involved and build community. Doing something that's fun, that just gets people into a room and gets them talking, is something that can actually break through that thing of being frozen and not knowing what to do. So we have to get very creative in the way that we do this work. It's really critical that in the current environment, we're being mindful of people's mental health space and not just whether or not they're doing things, okay? Because one of the things that, of course, fascism wants is for all of us to be shut down. Terrified, shut down, overwhelmed. And a lot of people are in that place right now for good reason. And so part of what we have to do there is work to build connection and community. And, if you join us for this free webinar that we're doing on Friday, you're going to hear a lot more about this. All right. Like how to build community even when you feel alone, how to build community even when people around you feel alone. All right. So I hope you'll consider joining us for that. And again, you can scroll up in the comments, the live chat comments, because it's all the way at the top, the link for that. Okay. One other question that I was asked today, which I thought was worth addressing. I laughed when I saw this comment, and I'm laughing about it now, because the question is an interesting one. The question essentially was, did I think it would be this bad? So, as I said to all of you in November and December and the beginning of January, nobody knew exactly how this was going to play out. Like, we knew from Project 2025 what the aims were, but nobody knew exactly how this was going to be carried out. And I will just tell you that I think the wild card in how all of this has gone down is Elon Musk. Because I want you to imagine how all of this would have gone if Elon wasn't a factor. let's just say hypothetically, like Elon hadn't like invented Doge out of thin air without congressional authority and empowered 20, Nazi youth brigade boys to go into places and try to take them over. Like right now, by the way, they've declared war essentially against the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is not a government agency. It's a standalone nonprofit. It's a 501c3, and they've invaded it and thrown out the leadership, even though they have literally no authority over it. It's not a government agency. Chaos, right? If Elon had not been involved in this, we would be looking at something very different. It doesn't mean that Russ Vought wouldn't have been confirmed. It doesn't mean that all these other, folks with a Christo-nationalist agenda wouldn't have been confirmed. But it does mean that things would look quite different, okay? I don't think we would see the speed. I don't think we would see the kind of like hatchet job nature of it. There's not, again, one of the things Elon's done here is that the Nazi Youth Brigade are all like highly accomplished engineers who have been able to disable all sorts of features that, if we didn't have that going on, might look very different in terms of how things are being cut, how people are being fired, how, people's accounts are being cut off, meaning like government employees' ability to access even their own email. And so, one of the things that I just want people to be aware of is that even if you read Project 2025, right? Even if you were deeply familiar with everything that was contained in it, how they were going to execute on it was a big question mark. And now we know. And this is one reason, by the way, why the Tesla takedown protests really need to continue. Because if Elon is out of power, if Elon is forced because his companies go down and he loses all of his money and his debts become due, and he has to litigate that and maybe even go bankrupt, which is not out of the realm of possibility, folks, we'll be looking at a very different situation in terms of what happens with the federal government. And it doesn't necessarily mean things are going to be repaired, but the pace of this and the nature of the destruction could be substantially slowed down. Okay. And I think like slowing things down is progress in this context, right? So I think the answer to this is that like, I knew it was going to be really bad. And that's one reason why from like the day after the election, I started talking to you all about mutual aid and dual power and building community where you live and thinking about what it takes for people to survive and finding ways to get into community that like make a difference to like literally your neighbors, right? Getting attached to the organizations where you live that are working to keep people alive. I mean, I started talking about this within 24 hours of the election being called, because I did see the prospect of people dying, right? Safety nets being gone. I mean, I don't think anybody who was familiar with Project 2025 was shocked by that, right? As a possibility. I think the means and the speed at which this has been done has shocked a lot of people. And the other thing I will just say, though, that I do think is worth remembering here is that, again, we don't know what's going to happen next week or next month. And one of the reasons why it's important to say that, rather than be in the place of like, it's all over, it's all hopeless, is that if we don't know what's happening next, we still have the potential to impact the future. And that's a key feature of hope as a practice and as a discipline, right? Is that the choices that we make in our day in and day out lives in terms of how we organize and with whom we organize and how we collaborate locally where we live, and the choices that we make about how we're going to engage, all of those things have the potential to move the needle in a positive direction. And I'll just reiterate something that, a faith leader that I follow on social media said this morning, which I think is really, really important. Okay. And what she said was, the fall of empire is devastating and scary. I'm paraphrasing. And as empires fall, they will take down as many people as they possibly can with them. But simultaneously lies the possibility of building a better world. And those of us who want that out of the ashes need to start actually working to build it now. And that kind of underlies my entire philosophy. Like those of you who have been with me all the way back to 2016 will remember that even at the moment when Trump was elected the first time, I said, you can engage 97% in pushing back, but I want 3% of the space that you are holding to be dedicated to envisioning the future that you want and working toward that. I think that's even more important now, right? We want a future where our society cares about the most vulnerable people. Start taking action where you live right now to care for the most vulnerable people. You want a future? I had a long conversation about this morning with my friend, where like trans kids are just simply accepted, right? It's not a big deal. We were talking about how like, kids in our own school system here, like kind of like, yeah, trans, non-binary, gender fluid, you know, like all sort, whatever the identity is, everybody's like, meh, great, good for them, right? We want that future everywhere of like, that's cool. We have to start working to support it now. We've got to get behind LGBTQ support agencies and like really back the organizations that are working to support trans youth right now. Okay. There's all sorts of ways in which we can start working to build the future that we want. Okay. The thing that won't build the future that we want is staying frozen or doom scrolling or, you know, doing that thing of like, it's all hopeless. Why bother? Okay. That's actually serving up on a silver platter the future that the fascists want. So this is your reminder right now. Like, and I know things are bad. Okay. Like I'm not negating that. I'm not bypassing it. None of that. I mean, like I was awake for the last 2 nights in the middle of the night going like, Jesus Christ, all this stuff about deportation to these concentration camps in El Salvador, where by the way, they know that the El Salvadoran government has murdered people, has tortured them to death, where sexual assault runs rampant in these prisons, including of children. That's where our government is sending people right now. Sending them without due process, without any evidence admitted before a judge that these people have ever done anything wrong. Not that it would be moral even if they had. It's bad. And simultaneously, we have to hold the space for the future that we want to build. And there is a counterbalance to these things, right? The counterbalance is that when you are working to make that better world, you yourself are in a better place. And that, by the way, gives you energy and motivation to push back and fight back and resist what is going on. Like finding ways to mobilize together in community so that people survive and maybe even thrive. Just imagine that. And simultaneously, we're doing things in community to push back against this wave of violence and hate and destruction. So I really want people to remember, okay, that only right now, even in the most optimistic polls, only a third of America believes in MAGA and what Donald Trump is doing. There's way more of us than there are of them. And part of our work right now is to make sure that we are very consciously choosing to act in ways that build the future that we want. Okay. And the more that you can do that locally where you live, the better you will feel, the better you will be in community with others, meaning like you're going to have support systems and other people are going to know they can rely on you for your support. And also, you're going to cultivate hope. And that's critical right now. It's just absolutely critical. So whatever I thought was coming, and I did at certain points think it could be this bad and worse. I hate to put it in those terms, but you know, like I don't think we've hit the bottom yet. I knew that the answer to all of this was to be in community with one another across every identity and across every movement in ways that were designed not just to help people survive, but to really build something much better. Because let's not forget, like when everything crumbles, that's when new foundations get built. And that's, again, not a means of dismissing all the harm and all the loss and all the kind of like disgust, frankly, that I have for the way all of this is going down. But it does mean that like there's a better future out there on the other side of this. And I will just remind everybody, like, you want a book about this? Please go read When No Thing Works by Norma Wong. She is an Indigenous Hawaiian woman who has written this incredible book about what comes on the other side of the end of everything. And it's a small book. It's an interesting book. It's not like any other book that I've ever read, and it will give you hope. All right. Yes, it was Rabbi Daniel Ruttenberg. Thank you, Julie, for actually naming her, because that is who was writing about this morning, and it's really critical. All right. Lots of love, everyone. Have a good day. Please don't forget to like this. Don't forget to share it with anybody that you know who may need it. Please subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching on the replay, drop me a comment because it tells the algo that you like what we're doing here. And I will see you all tomorrow. Reminder, there's no broadcast on Thursday. There will be a broadcast on Friday this week. Okay, so no broadcast on Thursday, but I will see you tomorrow and I will see you Friday. All right, take care, everyone. I will catch you soon. Hang in there, everybody. Go be in community with people who love you today. All right, bye.